Well, hello everybody. Good morning and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning to you all in the audience. Thank you so much for waking up this early. Hope you have coffee and you've had your breakfast because we have a great session ahead of us. And to those of you online, good morning, good evening, and not quite good night. Because again, there's a great program today. We're so excited to be here on the second day of the Sync Summit. And we're really excited about this panel. Negotiating the digital space. Today, we're going to have, for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a dynamic discussion with our great panelists talking about the role of youth in shaping the digital future and negotiating their digital spaces. I'm so excited to introduce my panel. Please. Yeah, give them a round of applause. Have a seat. Okay. Well, again, very excited to have this conversation today in the Sync Summit here in the cinema. So if you're online, but you're actually here on site, please come to the auditorium. So we're very excited for this session. So we're going to draw from research, from insight, data, practices, and experience, and hear really exciting, diverse opinions from wonderful youth leaders from I think every corner of the world here on the panel. So I always forget to do this. My name is Amani Alkhiami, and I am a program manager in global engagement in the Misk Foundation. And I just happened to be a Y20 delegate in 2021 under the Italian presidency. This was a long time ago, so I'm forgetting a little bit. But I have with me here today, starting all the way from the end, Kevin Muvunyi. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is a policy and innovation senior specialist at the Digital Corporation Organization, specialized in digital policies and emerging technologies. Next to him is Ghada Almegren, who is also a fellow Y20 alum from last year under the Indian presidency. She's a policymaker and an advocate in social, cultural prosperity and sustainability. Next to her is my colleague from Misk, Nora, Dhuwaihi, who is a program manager at the Misk Foundation, where she supports leaders and youth through leadership programs, who happens, again, like I said, to be my colleague, and we get to work together, which is amazing. And finally, I have with me Jose Lopez, who is an associate partner at Oliver Wyman in digital practice, government and public institution practice, focusing on public sector strategies, international affairs, digital AI, and thought leadership. So can you give us a round of applause just to make sure everybody's up and focusing with us today? Amazing. So, okay, let's kick off our discussion today with Ghada. So Ghada, how can youth effectively shape policies for better digital future and well-being? Can you reflect on your Y20 experience?
Sure, thank you, Amani, and good morning, everyone. Super excited to be in Sharqiya, by the way. I believe that, actually, I'm sure most of the youth that are here today, with myself included, were born digital natives. So we've been highly exposed to digital content and digital technologies to a point where it's becoming the most contributing factor to shaping up our perception of ourselves, the world around us, and beyond. So this makes us actually pretty vulnerable to the implications and consequences of digital technologies more than any previous generation. So we have a rightful place at the policy-making table where the policies on governing digital technologies and the use of it are being put in place. Therefore, I think in order to create a safer, more inclusive and equitable digital spaces, we need to look into digital content. And when I say digital content, I'm referring directly to algorithms, where those platforms that are using and employing algorithms mediate our information consumption in a way that, yes, it's optimized for engagement, but many, many other times they're optimized to pass certain agenda and ideologies. And what this does is it creates echo chambers around us where we think this single narrative is the reality when it actually is not. So we have had many discussions in the Y20 around this, and we've come to certain policy recommendations, one of which is to leverage those technologies that we have to build bridges between policymakers and the youth, In regards to digital technology, we've also proposed policies on data sovereignty, the importance of securing data, holding the platform curators accountable for the lack of transparency in algorithms. And it's also important to invest in youth-led tech innovation labs to empower youth to contribute to the digital economy, to developing humane technology for say.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And I think, you being a youth delegate yourself and kind of going into these spaces and advocating with not just youth, from Saudi Arabia, but actually having these discussions with G20 leaders from these countries. How do you how do you negotiate? How do you really advocate for the policies that matters for young people and for your community?
I believe, so as a policymaker and youth delegate at the same time, it's important for those policies to be inclusive of everybody's voice. So it's essential for us to first engage with our local communities, understand their aspirations in order for us to advocate for it and amplify it at global level. At the same time, when we negotiate policies, yes, we're coming with our Saudi perspective, but we need to grasp the nuances of everybody else's culture, systems, and set of values in order to come to something that's more inclusive of everybody else. And I believe this is the core of global policy negotiations, to arrive at a conclusion that's working for everybody.
Absolutely, and I love what you're saying, and it's a great segue to our next question. And I'll hand this over to you, Kevin. So, Kevin, the Digital Corporation Organization launched earlier this year the Youth Call to Action. Can you tell us more and tell the audience more about what is the call to action and why youth engagement on digital priorities is so crucial for a healthy digital future for all?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, so as you rightly mentioned, we launched a Global Youth Call to Action earlier this year in Bahrain on the margins of our General Assembly. And essentially, it has a number of actions that we have committed to, and some are for the youth and others are for decision makers. And just to name a few, so we do recognize that it is important to, for instance, uphold digital safety and ethics. We recognize the importance of advocating for digital inclusion and literacy. And on the side of decision makers, we recognize the importance of facilitating and empowering the youth to participate in international discussions on key digital topics. Now, on to the second part of your question, and as Ghada, am I saying your name right? as you mentioned, yes, the youth, we are digital natives. So the youth has a deep understanding of technology, technological trends, and for that reason, and we do recognize that at the DCO, and for that reason, we believe that that their voice should be heard in multilateral consultations. So the DCO, as an intergovernmental organization, we have currently 16 member states, and that's roughly around 800 million people. We take part in these consultations, so we are committed to carry the collective voice of the youth. And just lastly, I will end with a story. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of a Malaysian girl. This happened a few years ago. She essentially was sitting for her exams, and she needed a Wi-Fi connection, but she lived in a remote area, and she essentially ended up finding a tree, and because she knew that's where she could get a good Wi-Fi connection. And prior to that, she had actually built a shelter, but it was blown down, and But that didn't stop her. So she ended up going on this tree, and she was able to sit her exam. And she also documented this entire process on her YouTube channel. So I think this further reinforces what Ghada said. We, the youth, understand what's at stake, and we're best positioned to make a meaningful contribution.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think what you're saying is so crucial. And I think that's what a lot of, let's put it like this, the older generation needs to kind of realize that youth today are not just consumers of media and social media and digital spaces, but they're actually the co-creators of these spaces. And to a lot of the young people in the audience, if you didn't know, a lot of international organizations and digital corporation organizations, one of them, relies heavily on your opinions as young people. To what is your perspective? What do you see that you need to do in terms of negotiating, and maybe negotiating is not the right word in this sense, but in actually dictating what you need for your digital well-being and your digital safety. So that's wonderful, and that leads us to kind of the next segment and to talk about more on, we in Davos as the Misk Foundation worked really closely with Oliver Wyman during the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, and we launched an outcome report called From Reals to Real Impact as a result of roundtable discussions with global leaders there in Davos. So, Jose, can you tell us more about the report and what are some key highlights and insights?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me here. I want to say that also this is a bittersweet topic for me, talking about youth engagement, because as a millennial, when I hear Amani say the older generation, that's starting even to become me. We've got Gen Z, Gen Alpha after me, they're already setting new trends. Now, on this topic, Misk hosted an amazing pavilion at Davos. It's called the Misk Youth Majlis, really one of the most dynamic spaces on the promenade during Davos. We even had a Zoom executive there saying, I'd rather be here than meeting CEOs in the main building. So kudos to that effort. We had roundtables there, and we had a report coming out of it on these multi-stakeholder roundtables. Some of the key insights that came out of that, first of all, there's a risk of misrepresentation of youth voices online. So online, there's this kind of algorithmic tendency to just make certain hot topics or certain types of posts that are very emotive go viral. But what goes viral, it doesn't necessarily represent what everyone thinks. So if you want to hear from introverts and extroverts, global north and global south, different income levels, different backgrounds, you might need to be more intentional as a leader and where you're finding that information about youth voices. Certainly, if you're a decision maker, a policy maker, you don't just want to see what are the trending hashtags or which video got the most views. So that's one insight we identified. Another one, kind of on a related point, is the importance of thinking local. So youth and leaders are increasingly kind of globalizing their discussions, their engagement, but the impact in person would still be tied to local context, and the nature of the conversation can still be tailored. So we talked about going hyper-local once you want to actually affect the topic of high importance. Misk's own research, Misk found from global surveys that mental health is a big concern for youth, and that's the type of topic where local context can help a lot in providing the right support and collaboration. So these were just some of the initial insights we found. And then once we have youth trying to take action, leveraging their digital voice to change the world, we also talked about how there are some real-world enablers that leaders can provide. One is not just giving youth token representation, kind of having them on a side as a feel-good youth engagement initiative, but having them really embedded in leadership decisions. Whether in the private sector, that could be having a shadow board that advises the kind of quote-unquote older generation's board of directors, or in multilateral contexts, having the kind of Y20 or DCO inputs embedded as much as possible into the leader's own communiques and decisions. So these were just some of the thoughts we had, and one of my favorite phrases that came out of the roundtables was this idea of a minoritized majority, where there can be a kind of silent majority of youth, of people on the internet who are not getting that full representation. And there's more that needs to be done to make sure the global south and the global majority have a kind of equal stake in shaping the future. Because the problems that Gen Z and the world are facing are becoming truly all our problems, whether it's inequality, climate change. We absolutely need Gen Z and the young generation to tackle these and own the solution with leaders.
Absolutely. And first of all, I want to say thank you for triggering me this early in the morning on the late end of millennial. So that's just really late or early
We're in the
millennial.
same boat.
I'm not quite sure, but it's okay. But actually, what I thought was really interesting as well about the roundtables is that there's a lot of misconceptions that leaders on the top level had about what young people wanted. And I thought it was really interesting because they had assumptions that young people want things to be done in certain ways, or they kind of almost dictated what they wanted their business to grow as rather than listen to what young people were saying. And we were talking earlier backstage as well as how a lot of these social medias in particular are extremely addictive, and they require really regulating and require young people to really step up and say, hey, social media companies, or everyone who is working in this tech space, you need to make sure that these spaces are safe for us, but it also engaging, and it's important to include our voices as we go through. So thank you very much for adding. And Nora, I go to you. And so in Nora, again, there's a bias because I am also from Misk, but so in Misk, this year, or we started last year and launched it this year, we conducted a global youth survey to understand the enablers for youth-led social impact, positive social impact. So what role was technology found to be enabling young people towards social good?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us today. First of all, I just wanted to express that as a Saudi, I'm very proud that Sync is leading on this important topic. In regards to the research that we do at Misk, so Misk is a youth-focused organization, and really we try to understand and capture youth perspective and opinion in order to inform all our program designs, initiatives, things like the roundtable that we conducted at Davos. And in line with Davos, we wanted to publish a research that could inform our participation in Davos and in other engagements and in our programs, where we focused on what are the enablers that youth require to drive positive social impact. And we conducted a survey with 18,000 youth from 20 countries. And in parallel, because of the misconceptions that some leaders have that we wanted to understand, we also surveyed 500 leaders. And because we're in Sync today, I'm going to focus on the technology-related findings. Obviously, we had very insightful and in-depth findings that I invite you all to skim through in our paper. Now, the most interesting finding that drove a lot of the discussions was what the number one cause that youth are passionate about. Amongst 10 causes that we asked youth that they would like to contribute to, mental health and well-being was the number one cause. And this is just indicative of the pressures, the stressors that youth are facing, whether from technology, social media, and other challenges that they're facing in their lives. Also, technology could be a driver for good and for kind of motivating youth to do more. What we found is youth go online to learn more about a cause, and we see this today in areas of conflict. People follow certain individuals to learn about their experience, and this builds empathy, motivation to do more. We also found that 42% of youth are developing and building their social change skills online, and specifically on social media as well. So they're learning from other policy advocates on how to do stakeholder management, how to do problem solving, so skills that are necessary to drive change. Also, 38% of youth ranked online communities to be the most impactful network for them, more than, surprisingly, like attending events, and that could have multiple interpretations. And finally, they also use online communities to expand their network. And this is something that we as leaders, organizations, NGOs should develop technologies, platforms that could be utilized for youth to connect more with decision makers, with people of influence. And ultimately, technology could be used to motivate, incentivize, and drive youth towards social change. We did optimistically find that 88% of youth do have a sense of duty towards solving these global challenges. So very optimistic findings, lots of opportunities that I think every player in the ecosystem could kind of support and contribute to.
Yeah, that's really wonderful, and I really want to urge people here in the room, but also all of you who are here online as well, if you have any questions for our panel that we can take at the end. But also making sure that, all of these findings is really, again, coming from what youth want. is really we cannot do and we cannot develop any programs and we cannot develop any work unless we hear from young people on what we want, on what they want and what they need and how can they drive social good and positive social impact. And with that being said, I go to you, Ghada. Ghada, you're a Y20 delegate, and we worked really closely with ITRA and Sync in the past 4 years to really develop, papers and policy recommendations for young people in these spaces. But what is, from your perspective, a call to action to policymakers on increasing youth representation and contribution on digital policy?
This is actually a great question, Amani. Thank you for bringing it up. I believe that increasing youth representation in policy making in general and digital policy in specific has to be in close collaboration between both parties that are concerned. So we have the policymakers to establish communication and consultation channels, not only with the youth, but to bring together youth, policymakers, as well as tech entrepreneurs and developers, just like what Sync is doing right now. On the other end, though, for youth to be active citizens, seize those opportunities where you can engage in those conversations, make your voice be heard. And this applies across all governance tiers. Like from national level, we have platforms like Misk Youth Impact Majlis, where youth come together from across the kingdom to develop policy solutions on the issues that concern them the most, with tech being one of them. Also, when we go to a global level, there is the Y20, for instance. And on that particular note, I'd like to give a very warm shout out to the Saudi Y20 chair, Uthman Al-Muammar, and my fellow delegate, Hala, who are with us here today. But actually, it boils down to the policymakers adopting these policy recommendations and actively considering them in implementation of digital policy in order for us to say, yes, youth are contributing to building a healthier digital ecosystem.
Oh, wonderful. And I think, something really important that's kind of coming up as we're speaking is the need for a multi-stakeholder approach, a need of all of society. Youth alone cannot do it. The policymakers alone cannot do it. Everybody needs to come together on a top-bottom approach, but also meeting somewhere, and I think that was also an outcome in the Real to Real Impact document, is to meet in the middle, right? Everybody can come together to create a meaningful contribution for all. And with that, I go to you, Kevin. So what are some initiatives that organizations, intergovernmental organizations, like the Digital Corporation Organization is doing to implement and integrate youth perspective more effectively into digital policies?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I'll mention two. So we have a program that brings together different stakeholders in the digital economy. So we have decision makers, policy experts, business people, and so on. And we've been organizing global round tables to that effect. And we are currently working with our partners to include or incorporate a youth track, and that we will be able to capture their feedback. So just going back, these global roundtables discuss a number of topics. Currently, they're limited to 6. So for instance, we have digital rights, misinformation, digital trade. These are the topics that we're talking about. So we'll have a youth track where we'll be able to capture their feedback, and this will be incorporated in the outputs of this global roundtables. And our plan is to develop different frameworks and instruments from the outcomes of this roundtable. So I think that's a very good way to integrate the youth's perspective into global digital policies. So that's one thing. The second thing that we are actively working on with our partners is we're trying to bridge the gap between academia and practical policy development. So we have a program in the works which will see university students from across the globe work on proposing practical policy solutions to some of the challenges in the digital economy. Yes, so.
Amazing, and it's so interesting. I was part of one of the consultation groups for the call to action, and one interesting discussion that came up, we were talking about how our household appliances were surveilling us. So, like our vacuums, are actually, mapping out our houses. So where does that data go to? I have a washing machine, a fridge that's all connected to my app, so they probably know more stuff about me than I do. So it's so interesting that these are things that we normally don't think about, but it's actually, there's quite a lot of data being collected from even simple appliances at home that we need to be more aware of where our information and our data are coming and going to. So it's absolutely wonderful, opportunities as we move forward. And go back to you, Jose. We talked again about the real story impact paper. Lots of insight that came out of it. So, what are kind of maybe some key recommendations? That you think can enhance the dialogue and particularly the trust component between both youth and leaders to make sure that we're negotiating and getting to policies that help us all in a very changing digital world.
Absolutely. So a few recommendations came to the fore. One is having digital literacy programs, some targeted at youth and also a different type of digital orientation targeted at older generations. On the youth side, it's about overcoming misrepresentation, kind of finding your voice online rather than passively doom scrolling, and finding the right information diet within the digital space so you're building off a credible understanding of your community and your world. Then another initiative that came to mind was trying to leverage the generative AI trend that's happening. Things are moving so fast with generative AI, and we have to remember that GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer, emphasis on the word pre-trained. The data that you're training any generative AI chatbot with is extremely critical to shaping what quote-unquote answer or solution it's giving you. So we've been looking at how can we get chatbots to be trained on youth voices or at least diverse voices. And there's a few interesting ideas for how tech companies, multilateral organizations, and even foundations like Misk can contribute to that. Two last things. We also think that there need to be more forums for leaders and youth to sit at the same table. There's a lot of great work being done by the panelists here already, but continuing to find ways, even if it's hybrid events or fully digital spaces, to have focus groups, kind of councils that bring together all the generations in one place. There's more work to do there, and to have it linked to actual funding decisions or actual policy decisions would be a sign that it's being taken seriously. And the last thing is there's also an action for employers. So whether it's a private sector company or a government organization, there's a lot they can do to look within their own ranks and provide the empowerment, mentorship, and inclusion of their own youth into major conversations. And I mentioned earlier the concept of a shadow board, which Oliver Wyman has, many companies have, where the board of directors also sits and discusses their agenda with the young rising leaders in their organization. With all these tactics, it can build a sense of having an accurate fact base and having a real dialogue across generations on issues that matter. Once you do that, the trust hopefully builds.
Wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned AI because I think a lot of these forums right now, and you can notice everybody's talking about AI. One thing we've done recently, a focus group with young people to say do you care about AI? And we realized that a lot of young people were saying that we hear about it, but we really actually don't know how to use it, right? So it's beside the ChatGPT, I can do my homework in 2 seconds type of thing. But actually, kind of the pre-trained component, people don't realize that they have a responsibility as much as they're becoming a passive user of it to actually be contributing to designing and making sure that the training component of AI is also inclusive of their voices and kind of regional voices and global voices and so on, so forth. So thank you very much for bringing that point. And that leads us to Nora. I think how do we prepare, young people and youth to have a voice in advocating for policies that are important to them? How can we help them, get to the spaces and the platforms where they can advocate and get their voices heard?
Great. Actually, in relation to the AI topic, what was interesting is 35% of youth, when reported that they're currently using AI to drive their social initiative. But when we asked the likelihood of using AI in the future, it went up to 50%. So this is, I think, indicative of the aspiration, but the need for AI literacy programs. Now, in regards to policy making, as was mentioned by my peers here, policy making requires stakeholder engagement and mapping who are the key players in the ecosystem. And one of the key pillars of the research focused on the enablers, and specifically on what is called the social network network theory. So having to access influential nodes within a system that could drive innovation and change in that system, as Haifa and the rest of the panel really are eloquently doing that. Now, what we found is the number one obstacle and struggle that youth are facing to drive their social agenda, it's having access to the right people, or specifically identifying the right people, which is understandable if they're at school, in college. They don't really know if they're passionate about mental health or climate change, how to drive that agenda further. 38% actually then reported having a challenge in connecting with those people, because youth are not on LinkedIn necessarily. So how do they reach them? Forums like this is a great place. Finally, 36% reported that they struggle in convincing them of their cause or their initiative or their program. And that is also another gap youth that might face in having the right skill set to influence, to communicate, and so on. So all this is informative, to be honest, again, to everyone working in the youth engagement and empowerment space. On the contrary, 58% of youth, or similarly actually, 58% of leaders that were surveyed also reported that youth lack access to the right network. So there's consensus. Leaders believe that youth aren't able to advance in their social action and agendas because they don't know who to connect to, even more than lacking skills or motivation or empathy. So forums with leaders, having roundtables with leaders like we did in Davos was very effective. And one of the nice, I think, quotes I read in the report is, instead of bringing youth to the table, let's bring the table in the middle. Finally, to really elevate and amplify youth voices, we have programs at Misk like Ignited Voices. It's a program that actually is accepting applicants as we speak, and I invite you all to apply if you're interested. And the idea of Ignited Voices is to develop the skills of Saudi youth in representing Saudi internationally, so in diplomacy, public speaking, and so on. Haifa is a graduate of this great program, and not only did she stop there, she continued engaging in other programs at Misk to identify who are the key players, which I think is she's a great example of Misk's impact and what Misk aspires to achieve through Saudi youth. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And with the Ignited Voices and other programs, I think one thing that is really crucial that we both look for in Misk is the passion and the desire to want to make a difference, right? And then we work on all the public speaking skills and all of that, but it's mostly is what do you want and what do you care about? And this is not just for Saudi youth, but this note is really for everybody. What do you want to achieve in the world, and how do you want to see the change that you care about in your community? This is how platforms like Sync, platforms like that we have in Misk, are really important to kind of bring your perspective. It's not just for you to be a passive listener, but an active contributor to the conversation. And with that, we open it up for questions. So if anyone here has a question, or if we have questions online, we'd be happy to take them. Don't be shy. It's okay. We're very cool people. Go ahead.
السلام عليكم. Okay. يعطيكم العافية جميعا. Thank you so much. And given your policy making experience, we are facing a couple of challenges here when we advocate for digital well-being, especially when advocating for digital well-being coming from Saudi Arabia. The conversation always shifts to other issues like climate change and other problems that we are genuine in solving them, but it's not really relevant to the topics that we are talking about. So how we can deal with such situations, how we can make sure that the conversation will always be focused on digital well-being, and we can bring the others on the same table and be genuine about it.
Great. Who would like to take the question? Go ahead, Ghada.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to also hear from all of you, especially Amani, given your expertise. But I believe solving multiple issues in parallel doesn't make any other issue of less of an importance to the other. Yes, climate change is urgent, but I agree with you. We need to also place attention and focus on digital well-being and digital policy in general.
Oh, great. And, thank you, Ghada. And I think just to address as well that question, I think that what the problem that we see is people take problems in silos, right? Okay, it's almost like we fix this and then we fix that and we fix that. And sometimes you actually need to have a multi-tier approach to problem solving. To look, climate change is really important, but we also have a mental health challenge first. So let's look at all the different facets of a certain problem and be able to tackle it from all directions. And that's why, again, bringing that multi-stakeholder approach is so important and so crucial. Bringing all the different players, the government stakeholders, the private sector stakeholders, the nonprofit stakeholders, grassroots, everybody coming together and seeing, okay, what is the optimized solution? Often what we see, and everywhere around the world, is the redundancy in the same entities doing the same approach, but not really the most effective approach that tackles an all-of community. So I think that's I wouldn't say the best way, but a noteworthy way of how we can tackle these issues. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? There's a question over here in the back. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I have a question to Jose. Thank you. You've talked about the silent voices that sometimes it could be the majority. From your experience, what's the best way to capture those voices?
Absolutely. So I think one way, and we talked about this with some of our roundtable participants, is to intentionally have a sample you're targeting of voices and form a custom citizen panel or focus group that has an intentional plan or structure to it. So rather than just kind of opening up a feed and seeing who kind of yells loudest or jumps in actively into it, you actively pursue certain profiles and backgrounds and have a clear problem statement you're trying to tackle. So we take the example of digital well-being. If you start by putting out a call for, we want people who have opinions on how to improve digital wellness, mental health, based on current trends of mental health deteriorating. Then you can kind of recruit people and help them understand there's a mission behind why they're participating. So this would hopefully pull out people who otherwise wouldn't just chime in voluntarily because they know there's an objective or a call to action that's going to come out of it.
Brilliant. I think we can take one last question. I think we have a question over here.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to thank you guys for what you're doing right now. But I want to ask a young kid like me, what can I do to have my footprint in the future, and how can I shape my future? And yeah, that's my question.
Great question.
Thank you.
Oh, so much. Who would like to take that question? Maybe Kevin, do you want to take a couple?
Sure. Though I do think Ghada is the best positioned to answer this question. I mean, just by looking at her journey so far. But I think moving forward, try and see if you could take part in different programs, which have to do with the digital economy, or I mean, there's different youth groups now where that advocate for on different digital topics. So I think that would be a good starting point. But I think this is really a good question,
maybe
because
if everyone on the panel can just say a quick advice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ghada.
I always say it starts with you identifying your cause, cultivating your power, and working towards it. And Nora shared pretty interesting insights on the importance of youth hubs. I think they are catalysts for innovation, for leaving a long-lasting positive impact.
Okay, Nora.
Yeah, thanks, Ghada. I think starting with that question is a great start. Choose a cause that you're passionate about. I'm sure you're experiencing information overload. There's so many things that you would love to, I'm sure, contribute to. But select one area that you want to really have an impact in, learn about it, leverage, understand who are the key players in this area, starting with programs in non-profits or organizations that are contributing to this area. So it takes research, identification of certain goals that you want to achieve, or inshallah you'll have an impact in whatever you do.
Go ahead, Jose.
My advice would be seek out mentors and coaches from the older generations, because they will be surprised what they learn from you, and you will be surprised what you learn from them. And just to give one example, when it comes to using generative AI, actually the older generations are sometimes better at using it because they're used to delegating work to people they work with. So they treat it like this is an analyst who works for me, or I know that it's not a perfect output, whereas sometimes digital natives treat generative AI like an oracle, like it's their teacher. So they're even on digital spaces, even things where the youth you'd think would have the full answer, both sides of the generational divide have a useful insight and skill to share with each other.
Great. And I would say being in places like this is your first step, right? To start in developing yourself, listening to the conversation. And I hope you're speaking to everybody around to listen to their perspective, get to know them, and think about what do you care about and how do you grow yourself further. Well, with that being said, thank you all for being an amazing audience at 9 a.m. And whatever you are online, thank you so much. Thank you very much for my great panelists and the organizers of Sync, and Ithra, of course, for hosting us. I wish you a fantastic rest of your day, and thank you very much.